Ladies and gentlemen, retaking a lost site in Valorant is one of the most difficult things in the entire game. That being said, in this video, let's break down exactly why it's so difficult to retake a lost site and give you tips and tricks on exactly what you need to do to give yourself the best shot at clutching it up for your team. Anyways, if you like Valorant content just like this, or if you want to get up-to-date Valorant news, smash that sub button. But enough talking, let's just jump right into it, shall we? So the first question that comes onto people's minds is, why is retaking a lost site so difficult? So this is because of a number of reasons. They essentially have control of the entire area, and you give up your inherent defensive advantage when the enemy has already planted a spike. In addition to that, they put you on a time crunch, which automatically puts you under a certain amount of pressure. Pressure makes it more difficult to perform and means that a lot of your actions have to be sped up. In addition to that, if you have to defuse, enemies can effectively wait to peek you. And when you defuse or start to defuse, you give your enemies precious information about exactly where you are, which means that you're kind of a sitting duck because information is king in a game like this. Now, just for clarification, it takes 45 seconds for a bomb to explode after it's planted, and it takes 7 seconds for it to fully defuse. Now, the next thing that you need to understand is, what do you do in order to defuse or retake a point if you have enough time? Let's say you have a full amount of time, that full 45 seconds or something comparable. What do you need to do? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to clear every area around the spike or in the line of sight of the spike. Now, what do I mean by both these things? So first, let's talk about around the spike. So you don't want to just run straight to the spike, start defusing, because potentially you could get peeked from any number of corners around the spike zone. Essentially, you want to slowly and safely check every single one of the close corners to the spike so that you make sure that there's no enemies nearby, and it gives more information about where enemies are potentially hiding. Now, the second aspect of that is flushing people away from the LOS of where the spike is at. Let me give you an example. If the spike is within natural LOS from something like heaven on top of a high ground, let's say we're talking about the split high ground, the split heaven. If the spike is within an LOS of that, that's one more place that enemies can peek you from, and they have an inherent advantage when they're on the high ground because your head hitbox is easier to hit because they're on the high ground, and they can peek you at any time effectively. Now, if you have the time, the best thing for you to actually do is try to engage or take a fight with the enemy on the high ground and flush them out. Essentially, on your way to the spike, you potentially flush out any enemies that are holding different locations, and also ensure that you take more 1v1 fights. If you simply run to the spike and try to defuse, not only could you get peeked from multiple angles, but you could potentially get peeked from multiple people at the same time because every single person around the spike is within enough distance from the spike in order to safely peek it if an enemy tries to defuse. So you know that you're basically setting yourself up for like a 1v3 scenario, which is incredibly difficult. If instead you try to clear every single avenue, every single site, you clear the heaven, you clear the corner, you clear the cubby, you could take a lot more 1v1s, and you set yourself up to potentially punish enemies when you know where they are because you effectively eliminated a lot of the places where they could be. Now, if the spike is well hidden behind natural cover and you know that you already checked the close place where an enemy could be hiding from, you could try for a full defuse. You'd be surprised how many times that players could actually get a full defuse off if they just committed to it. At the very least, if you know that they're far enough away, they'll at least have to run to you in order to catch up to you, and that is an audible sign that you could potentially punish them. You could potentially actually get off the spike and potentially kill them. Now, at the very least, if you know the enemies are far away and you check the close angle and your plant is behind natural cover, you can at least try for the halfway mark, about 3.5 seconds. Then from there, you can lock that halfway mark and then try to take a duel with the enemy. Now, this is like the perfect scenario, the scenario where you have all the time in the world to take these fights, but what if you have no time? How do you play differently if you have very little time in order to kill everybody and defuse or just clutch out the win? So ultimately, you're gonna have to pressure the enemy to peek you, as you can't possibly check every corner. You can't clear out the high ground, you can't check every corner around the map because you just don't have the time. When enemies hear the spike defuse noise, they will be highly pressured to swing you after a certain amount of time because they know that you could potentially be trying to stick it. Now, utility that either blocks the enemy from pushing or blocks LOS of you or the zone of the spike, those are incredibly powerful because the enemy has no idea whether or not you're sticking the spike or you're baiting, and you can use these to prevent them from swinging you and put more pressure on them because essentially they do not know which one you're trying to go for. Now, if you are baiting an enemy, do yourself a favor and don't run or make any noise after you try to stick the spike and you get right off of it, because then the enemies know, hey, this guy's not actually trying to stick the spike. I don't even have to peek him yet because they heard your movement. So do not make any footsteps after you try to effectively bait the enemy, because what you want is for them to swing you, but you're actually waiting for them. Now, the last thing about baiting in general, or when you have low time, keep in mind when you are trying to bait how much time you have. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a person essentially try to bait, they stop trying to plant the spike, they never even got to the halfway mark, and then the spike explodes because they didn't give themselves enough time. If the enemy has to peek at that exact moment in order for you to kill them and defuse, often you're putting yourself in a nightmare scenario, and I wouldn't suggest it if you could avoid it at all costs. Now, lastly, another important aspect of this is if you try to go for a defuse play, let's say you try to go to the point, you killed maybe 1 or 2 people, but you know there's multiple enemies left, and you realize, I'm not going to have enough time to effectively do this. Now, something you could do is you could either run away for enemies, or if you know the enemies might be waiting for you, you don't want to be running full speed out of there because enemies could be just hiding behind a corner or something like that. You don't want to give up your gun or whatever, and you want to try to trade out as much as possible. So don't just go running away from the bomb if it's going to explode. If you can help it, if you're still going to survive the blast if you walk, I would highly suggest you do so, just so the enemies don't know where you're coming from. You could potentially kill them, or at the very least, you can make it a lot harder for them to just wait for you and kill you. Anyways, I hope this guide has been extremely helpful for you. If you have any other tips or tricks for the community, definitely leave them down below so everyone can learn from your valuable insight. Anyways, if there's any other video concepts or any other guides you want to see, definitely let me know and I'll get right on it. Anyways, that's all we got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time,